So I'm going to talk briefly and open it up to questions, and then we're going to move to the open space, which is a very exciting format for this. And I want to start just with this thing we're talking about, spirituality. And what is this thing, spirituality? And I came across a very interesting quote about it from an American psychologist from more than 100 years ago, William James. He wrote a wonderful book called The Varieties of Religious Experience, which is also could be titled The Varieties of Psychotic Experience, because they're very, very similar in this book. And William James said that, and I'll just paraphrase, that the spiritual perspective is the belief that there is an unseen order and that the highest good is to harmoniously adapt ourselves to this order. And so for me, you follow that? Isn't that an interesting definition of, which is kind of like what a dream is. A dream has an unseen order in the background. And for me, I thought that was a very provocative and very interesting way of understanding what it is that we're trying to do here. If we are inside of an unseen order, then the outside is not separate from the inside. Then what we think is coming at us is actually coming from within us, and the other is also ourself, which I've had a number of very interesting experiences that have been teachers around this for me. And so I want to tell you one story about that, which is that a few years after I came out of the psychiatric hospital, I was living in San Francisco, and I was going back to school, and I was trying to pull my life together. And one day I was walking by my school, and I saw across the street, I saw my psychiatrist from the hospital walking right in front of the school. And I thought, wow, why is my psychiatrist walking right in front of my school? That's an amazing coincidence. It's an amazing synchronicity. And so then I went home, and our rental apartment, we would collect mail from other tenants. It was just stacking up that hadn't been forwarded before. And so I came home, and I looked down on the stack of mail, and there on the top of the stack was a letter, and it was addressed to someone who had the same name spelled the same way as another psychiatrist that I had in the hospital. I thought, wow, I just saw one psychiatrist in front of my school, walking in front of my school, and now I see this letter in my house the same day, just a few hours later, addressed to someone with the same name, spelled exactly the same way as my other psychiatrist. So I went to my roommate, and I said, this is an incredible experience I just had. I just saw one psychiatrist, now this letter is spelled the same way. And the roommate looked at me, and she said, Will, the man who used to live in this house was a psychiatrist. And I realized that I was living in the same house as my psychiatrist. And so I looked at her and I said, what room was he living in? I was living in the same room as my psychiatrist. Now, at this moment, Western science says it's just purely a coincidence, San Francisco, whatever, it's just a coincidence. Don't read too much into it. But, of course, my experience was that no, and I was very, very frightened of this. I was very terrified. Here was a man who was responsible for locking me up. Here was a man who was responsible for being part of the institution that had put me in restraints, that had put me in solitary confinement. And this was someone who had hurt me. And I obviously felt a lot of anger and upset around this person. And not only did they have the power of the law to do this, now they had this incredible occult, magical, diabolical, demonic power to reach through reality and reach into my very room and then be there in my room with me. And I was, of course, terrified about this. But meditating on this experience and working through this experience, I started to come to a different understanding. of this? What could be the meaning of having a synchronicity, of discovering that you're living in the same room as someone who abused you? Does anyone have a sense of what that might be? Because for me, it was a realization that actually this person who I think is other, who is separate from me, is maybe also part of this unseen order. Maybe there's something more here. And maybe ultimately this person who I feel has been such an abuser and in a sense is my enemy is actually myself. It's actually a part of me. And that became a very, very powerful learning for me about how I do the work that I do. I'm obviously very much an activist. I feel that we need a social movement to make change in psychiatry, and anger is, of course, part of social movements. It's one of the engines of social movements. But can we, at the same time, hold on to the reality that what it is that we're against is also part of us? Can we, at the same time, carry that compassion with us? As we are pushing the other out of the way, can we also invite them to join us and be part of what we're doing and be part of creating something for the future? So I have been very interested in this unseen order. And I love the quote from William James, the idea that religion is the perception of the highest good is to adapt oneself harmoniously to this order, because it doesn't necessarily have to be God. It can also be nature. It could also be an ecological perspective. It could also be understood as a non-theistic order, the Tao or Buddha mind. And whether you want to call it Jesus or the ayahuasca spirit or a vast, active, living intelligence system, whatever it is that you want to call it, that I think is what is going on. I think that we're discovering that there's something beyond us, and we're actually collaborators with reality. And the perception that there is meaning coming to us, that there is messages coming to us, that there is some kind of force that's trying to wake us up and get our attention, that it has a special destiny for us, that it has a special plan for us. These kinds of things will get you diagnosed as psychotic, or if enough people agree with you, you can be a prophet and found your own religion, which is exactly what the Old Testament is all about, right? So, exactly. So, psychosis is essentially a form of adaptation. Psychosis is normal. It's a normal human experience. And there's a couple of very, very simple proofs of this. One is that in evolutionary biology, we know that any persistent trait that a species has can only persist because it helps that species to be fit for its environment. It has to confer some kind of advantage to that species. So psychotic experience seems to appear throughout history, throughout human culture, throughout the world at a fairly consistent rate. And so if it was actually a disease or a failure or a breakdown or some kind of thing that needed to be gotten rid of, then it wouldn't actually confer any kind of advantage to the species and would have disappeared. And yet still, here it is, part of what it is to be human. So that's one reason that psychosis is normal. The second reason that psychosis is normal is that it's actually can be modeled as an adaptation in animals. It's a very simple thing. I learned about this in my PhD research, that there actually is modeling of laboratory animals that experience things that could be called psychotic experiences. They have different kinds of behaviors, have different kinds of responses to stimuli. I'm not endorsing animal experimentation, but these models of psychosis can be created simply by changing the environment that the animal is in, that a rat that is exposed to stress will start to exhibit psychotic experiences. And one of the things that will create psychotic experiences also is maternal neglect. So stress and neglect are very, very causative for this response that these animals will have. And we know that all kinds of different stress will create this response in humans. In fact, I'm offering, I don't know if I told the Crazywise people about this yet, but I'm offering a very, very special workshop next year here in Amsterdam. All of you are invited to this very, very special workshop. It's a workshop where you can experience hearing voices, that people who come to this workshop will become psychotic and hear voices. And it's a 6-day workshop. You can't leave the workshop, and you can't sleep during the workshop. And I guarantee you, at the end of the workshop, you will all be hearing voices, because everyone in this room has the capacity for psychotic experience if you're put into a certain kind of environment, if you are put under a certain kind of stress. Now, some people will start to hear voices sooner than others. We don't know why that is, individual variation. But the reality is that what we're calling craziness is actually a quality that humans have. It's a skill. It's actually a talent. So why is it that someone would respond to these kinds of stresses in this way? Well, it's a creativity response. It's a response that says, if I'm trapped, if I can't get out of this stress, if this reality is not working for me, I'm going to try and find resources in a different reality. I'm going to try and just jump out of my ordinary identity. I'm going to try and move beyond who I am and start to communicate with something bigger. I'm going to start to connect with something broader. I'm going to start to open up my identity to something beyond me. And we know that the experience of becoming a shaman, of being initiated into that capacity to connect with something beyond the individual, is induced by stress. It often looks like a psychotic experience. It's created through a crisis, a shamanic initiatory crisis. And so for me, this really is what makes psychosis and revolution so deeply intertwined. Because a revolutionary moment in a society is a moment where those who are oppressed, those who are silenced, those who are marginalized, find that they have no way out. And having no way out, and under the stress of oppression, they reach for something beyond their identity as oppressed people. They move to some kind of vision beyond the situation that they're in. And they precipitate a crisis, but that crisis can also be an initiation for the whole society. It can potentiate the stress and the difficulty of the society and of the oppressive status quo as a way of breaking through to another reality, as a way of breaking through to another reality. And then, of course, you can say, well, wait a second, Will, isn't this a romanticization of the psychotic experience? Isn't this a way of saying, well, people aren't suffering? Obviously, people are suffering. Well, of course people are suffering. Of course people are suffering. But if I can have a psychotic experience and be considered a mental patient in one context and be considered a shaman or a prophet in another context, obviously it's not the experience that is the problem. It's something else. It's not which reality I'm living in. It's not whether I'm having strange voices and visions and connecting with different kinds of creatures and different kinds of perceptions and messages. That's not it, because in one culture, that's considered pathological and crazy, and in another culture, that's considered actually exalted and connecting with the divine and a gift. So clearly, it's not the capacity to have altered states that is the problem. The problem is two things. One, it's isolation, and two, it's powerlessness. And when we talk about healing people who have psychosis, if we are saying that we have to get rid of their voices, if we are saying we have to make them stop seeing connections, if we are telling them you need to see the fact that you're living in your psychiatrist's room as a coincidence, then what we are doing is we are disempowering that person and we are committing an act of violence on that person. If we're trying to get rid of their reality, we are doing just the same that Europe has been doing to the indigenous world for the last 500 years. We are imposing, as a colonial act of violence, one reality on another. Instead of trying to annihilate that reality, we have to say, how can we help this person to not be isolated? How can we help this person to be empowered around their reality? Because for me, it isn't hearing voices. For me, it isn't seeing messages in television or seeing messages in the noise outside or seeing messages in the fact that we're surrounded by engines. And engines are, of course, the symbol par excellence of the Industrial Revolution. This is what fueled a revolution. We're surrounded by the machinery of revolution. To me, this is not a coincidence that we're having this talk. If we see this as pathological, I will be profoundly disempowered, I'll become profoundly isolated. I don't want to get rid of these strange, unusual, different realities. I don't want to be normal. I don't want to be normal. What I want is to no longer be isolated and to no longer be disempowered. And the way that I can do that is with all of you. If all of you are with me, then we can make this revolution. And then real healing can really happen, because it's not just going to be an individual who heals from their psychosis. It's going to be the whole society that changes and transforms and breaks through to something else. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And we have some time, so why don't we do some questions about psychosis and revolution and shamanism and engines and synchronicities and yes.
Shall I go with the microphone?
Yes, please, please, yeah.
Do you want to ask in English or in Dutch? Okay.
Yeah, I would like to know, how would you react if somebody told you, now we're going to heal psychosis with technological... How would you heal psychologically psychosis with masks?
With masks?
Yeah, I've seen that lately, and it's so weird.
I'm told, my reaction is, I'm interested. Tell me more.
Yeah, they are masks and glasses, and people who suffer from psychosis or have a problem with it, then they experience again what psychosis does with them. Also, a doctor, a psychiatrist, can put on these glasses, plus a microphone, plus hearing, and he will have an experience of a psychosis. It's a new product from the... Yeah.
Sort of like the internet. It's a machine that you can experience all the... I think it's called avatar therapy, I think is what you're talking about maybe. My response is, if someone says that's their reality, then I need to respect their reality. I think all these different techniques for healing can be very useful. They can also be very damaging, depending on the question of isolation and powerlessness. If someone is powerless and they're in a hospital, and the psychiatrist says, this will heal your psychosis, I'll be very skeptical of that. But if they're in a circle with other people and they have an opportunity to explore many, many different kinds of healing, and they choose that, and that's what they want to do, and that really serves their empowerment, then I say, fantastic. I have the same attitude towards medications, I have the same attitude towards psychotherapy. If the person truly is becoming empowered and overcoming their isolation, then I think it's helpful. I'm suspicious of it because it doesn't question or explore the meaning of the psychosis or help the person to understand what they might be adapting to, because there might be a message in that psychosis. But psychosis, I mean, these experiences involve a lot of suffering. So whatever people can get that helps them, I'm grateful. And it doesn't sound like it has side effects of causing diabetes or tardive dyskinesia, so that's an advantage.
Yes, I have a question also. Lately, I was joining a mindfulness class with lots of patients, clients. I have suffered from I have had psychosis also. But what I wondered, and what in a way made me angry or irritated, was the fact that when you come out of your psychosis, then there's help. We now have the FAC team, where several disciplines who can help you to get back in society. What I find so attractive to the mindfulness was the quiet place, the Buddha, the fire, the sense, wierook. How long does it take for people who are in crisis to come to that place, to have in the environment where they have their illness, I don't know, crisisopname, that there is a space where they can just be, because what I think is when people experience psychosis or manic depression, they need safety, need to feel safe. And that's what I'm trying to work on in my in Eindhoven, is to get more awareness of people having a talk with the caretakers, having a talk, having a laugh, having a walk. I think it's only it's a seed, and it must grow very quickly, because I see everywhere people suffering and on medication and totally not adapting anymore. So what do you think about that?
Mindfulness is great. And it can also be used, as we know from religious cults and the history of authoritarian religions, meditation and mindfulness can also be used to control people and keep them down. I would hate people to think that they need to use mindfulness to control and suppress negative emotions like anger and fear, because anger and fear are very useful emotions that can help us to understand situations of oppression or situations of abuse. And but in general, I think that it's very, very positive that that's being used more and more. I understand it's used here a lot, so that's great. Meditation really helped me, but it also helped me not to calm down, but to help me get more excited about life as well. So let's also go over here. I don't want to. Okay, great, and then we'll go.
Yeah, hi. My name is Hofstede. I'm a bipolar patient, and I think you take a dangerously romantic view of mental illness.
I hope not, but please.
But you do, in my experience anyway. Your point about shamanism is wrong, because psychotic patients becoming shamans, that's not the case. It's just shamans becoming shamans. So that's a different point. Then also you bring up the natives, which is a good point, because we're living in the age of transformation, which is the prophecy of the white bison. Now the white bison says that the four races, the red, the yellow, the white, and the black race will unite. But my point is that the psychotic people all over the world is in fact a nation of people. We are a people. We have a voice, we have no voice, but it's important that from Baghdad to Rio to Hong Kong to Amsterdam to San Francisco, we become aware of the fact that we are a people and that we should act like a people. So that's my point.
Okay. I mean, I think if I understand you, I may disagree, because I think that if we tell someone that they're not a shaman and we tell them they're schizophrenic instead, to me that seems very, very dangerous, because it hurts that person, it marginalizes them and puts them in another place. But I think this is why I tried to say I don't want to romanticize, because the suffering, in my view, isn't necessarily the fact that someone hears voices, or that they see messages, or that they have a spiritual experience, or that they're angry, or that they're disruptive. To me, the difficulty is not that. The difficulty is the fact that the person doesn't have a sense of connection, that they're isolated, and they don't have a sense of empowerment, that they're disempowered and they're not in control. So maybe we agree. I don't know if we actually. Okay, but I think it's really important that we not just jump to psychosis and shamanism, because there is very much a very real danger of minimizing the real suffering that people have, and I think that is dangerous, to minimize suffering. So I agree with you. Yes, I was locked up. I agree with you.
In my introduction this morning, I said there's a sense of fuel and a sense of grease in the air here.
Yeah.
So we need fuel for the debate, and we need grease for the integration.
Yeah.
There's another comment here.
Yeah, I had a question about. I'm very curious about your workshop for next year.
My workshop for next year, okay.
And because I was wondering, also in relationship with the former speaker, who was speaking about spiritual energy. Do you think that there's a sort of balance between physical and spiritual energy in our normal life, and that we have to sleep to inflate our spiritual energy to charge a battery, and that our consciousness is possible because of the interaction between the two? And then when one of them runs out, you know, like when we wake up, we start to become conscious, and then we sort of plug in a sort of, we stop charging. So we use all the spiritual energy until we get tired again and fall asleep. And then we unlock the connection with the spiritual realm and can recharge our spiritual battery. And so when you run out of this spiritual energy, then weird things start to happen. Can you relate to that kind of way of thinking?
Yes. Makes perfect sense. If I follow you, yeah. You get tired and then things get strange.
When you sleep, you recharge.
Sure, yeah. So I mean, sleep is one of the primary reasons that people go into a psychotic crisis is sleep deprivation. And one of the ways that we can most help people is to help them out of that sleep deprivation. And the problem is that people who have a sleep deprivation crisis, they go into the hospital, they get to sleep, they come out of it, but then they're told, you have a disease, so you must take a medication to prevent this disease coming back. First of all, that's not how the medications work. Second of all, the medications can actually increase the likelihood of having a crisis. And third of all, there's much better ways by just teaching someone to avoid sleep deprivation.
Yeah, well, maybe I go on to the next, but we have some limited time. But there is some common sense about nature. If you don't eat, you die.
Yeah.
If you don't sleep, you get psychotic. That's nature. So
But I guess the question, but the question is like, what is energy? What is spirit? I mean, my own view is that everyone is going to have a different way of understanding this. This is also a very narrow cultural sample. If we took a cultural sample of the whole world, there would be so many different languages, so many different frameworks and systems. My view is that they're all true. They're all true because they're all different people's personal experience, and what we need to do is figure out a way to get along with each other together so we're not isolated.
Okay, two
yes.
And two relatively short answers.
Yes.
Okay. Ralph asks about the diesel that makes us live. And I have a question about this. This morning I asked the question about fear. And now you told your story about your personal transformation and about the universal transformation you want to achieve. And I wonder how you react on the insight that love, and then I don't mean personal love, but fundamental conscious love is the life force that helps us to transform.
Love.
Love. How do you respond to love?
I love love.
How does it help?
Well, it's very simple. Love is just the sense of not separation. Someone that I love deeply, when they are in pain, I feel pain. When they're hungry, I'm hungry. What I have, I want to give to them. I feel at the boundaries. When we make love, if it's good, we feel boundaries dissolving between us and the other. And so really what we're holding up as love, as the ultimate, is really just the sense that we're not separated, that we're actually all one, which is really, if you look at a forest, or you look at a jungle, or you look at any ecological context, you cannot explain one piece without it being perfectly connected and absolutely connected with others. And so nature expresses and shows us a sense of absolute unity and non-separation. Nature is an expression of love. Healing is a natural process that happens. It happens, and if we can get out of the way of it, we can allow people to, and I think one of the reasons that altered states are so valuable for healing is because they allow us to get out of our ordinary identity of suffering. Suffering is just the identification with the one who suffers. If you no longer identify with me and I'm this, and move beyond that, then you're free of the suffering. So love, I think, is the answer. In fact, I could just summarize everything by saying all you need is love. But then, how do you put it into practice? And for me, I fundamentally believe that there is a divine messenger, there's a divine intelligence, there's something that's asking us actively to join us in a collaboration. This is a message that I get whenever the messages are coming or people are asking me questions. It's some kind of thing that's saying, hey, wake up, find a new way forward. And so move beyond our separation and see that the other and the outside is also us, is an act of love, to listen to that message and to collaborate with it, not follow it in a simple-minded, I have to do this because the television told me to, but invite it into a conversation. That, to me, is love and why it's so significant. I hope that was clear. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
It's great to end with love, and maybe you can write a song, All You Need Is Love, or it may have some...
I did write a song.
You did write it?
Yeah,
you're one of the Beatles.
It was me. The Beatles are me, you're me, we're all me, everybody's me.
I promised Miranda
yes,
the last question.
Thanks. Yeah, you were talking about a revolution, which is needed to make all of us, people with psychotic experience, less isolated. But I thought maybe we can make it a revolution sound so...
it's archaic.
Fighting, you know,
yeah.
Struggling again, you know.
Yeah.
And I don't like that.
I don't like it either. It's strategies and it's all military metaphors.
Yeah,
it's all,
exactly.
Yeah.
So yeah, maybe we...
How about a party? Let's have a big festival.
I was thinking about transformation, but that sounds so official.
Yeah.
Party is better. Yes.
Party's getting there, but let's. Yeah. But this is. I love this. Closer. This is exactly the kind of conversation that we should have. How do you have an uprising against a system of power that's not an uprising against the other as separate, but is actually an invitation for all of us to see how we're reflections of each other? How do you do that? I don't know. I think that's the question, though.
I have
that's
some
the
ideas
question.
we'll talk about.
Yes, yes.
Okay. I think also the other people, they don't really know, you know? You can think that they know and that they know they are excluding lots of people, but they don't really know.
But believe it or not, here's a news flash. Those in the role of the oppressor also have a part of them that is oppressed. Because we're all human, all of us have that. It just may not be showing itself. So.
Thank you, Will.
All right.
I think you need an applause, Annie. You deserve an applause.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay.